त्यांना फोन लावून विचारा कुठे माझा फोनला रेंज नाही. कुठे गेले?
Good morning, one and all. On behalf of Department of Computer Engineering and IEEE Student Chapter, I welcome Dr. Rachna Patil ma'am and all the participants for the 5th day of the Faculty Development Program on Research and Emerging Trends in Digital Forensic. Today, we are having Dr. Rachna Patil ma'am as our resource person. It's my pleasure to introduce ma'am. Dr. Rachna Patil ma'am is Associate Professor at Pimpri Chinchwad College of Engineering, Pune. She is having 18 plus years of teaching experience. Ma'am has completed her PhD from University of Mumbai with specialization of cyber security and digital forensic. Ma'am is a certified ethical hacker. She has published 40 plus papers in international journals and conferences. Her primary area of research is cryptography, network security and digital forensic, especially the network forensic. She is a powerful force in the workplace and uses her positive attitude and tireless energy to encourage the students to work hard and succeed. We are fortunate to have such an eminent person as our resource person today. I request Dr. D.V. Meghne sir to felicitate Dr. Rachna Patil ma'am. Thank you. Now, I request Dr. Rachna Patil ma'am to proceed with her session.
Good morning, all of you. As has given my introduction. So today's topic for this session is I'll be explaining about a network forensic tool which I developed during my PhD work. So there are multiple existing network forensic tools. So there might be a question in your mind that why there is a need of this new tool. How it is different than the existing network forensic tool. So over the period of time, like from Monday, I think you're listening the different sessions related to this. So you all are aware about what is digital forensic, what do you mean by cyber crimes, and also I will not go in much detail. I'll just you all know about what is cyber crime and what is digital forensics. Okay, so we'll directly go to this particular tool. The name of the tool is Root Tracker. It is a proactive network forensic tool for cybercrime investigation because you all know that to prove any cybercrime in court of law, what is required is digital evidences. Now, any digital evidence is not acceptable in court of law. The evidence has to satisfy some particular characteristics. If it satisfies those characteristics which are prescribed in section 65B of Indian Evidence Act, then only those evidences are acceptable in court of law. So the tool should, while collecting the evidences or while preserving the evidences or while transferring the evidences from one person to another. So you all must be aware about chain of custody. Do you know what is chain of custody? So for example, I am the investigator who is investigating some cybercrime case. Suppose I found out some evidence, some hard disk, suppose that hard disk is a evidence for that particular crime. So I am not the only person who is handling that case. There are multiple people who handle the case, right? So I am the evidence owner. The evidence owner has to analyze the evidence and then transfer that evidence to somebody else. For example, prosecution. So while transferring that evidence, some records has to be maintained, that who is transferring, to whom they are transferring. While transferring the evidences, they also have to take care that the evidences are not tampered. Right? So that is called chain of custody. So during the lifetime of the evidence has to travel with the multiple people. So that is chain of custody. So that care should also be taken care by the particular tool. So this is Root Tracker, a proactive network forensic tool for evidence collection and to support the cybercrime investigation. So let us proceed. Can you please move to the next slide? So this is the outline of the presentation. Next slide. Okay. So sometimes when my internet connection is down, I completely forget that rest of my computer still works. So for how many of us this is true? I think for all of us. Now in day-to-day life we require internet to maintain our daily routine. Every minute or we are dependent on that telephone, mobile phone or laptops. Okay, so this is true for everybody. So dependency of people on internet is increasing day by day to maintain their daily routine. So what is the effect of this? When we are becoming more and more dependent on internet, the effect of that is the rise of cybercrime cases. Next slide. So what is the motivation of this? So as I told you that dependency of internet is increasing day by day. So if you could look at the global digital snapshot here, more than 50% of world population is now using digital devices and the number is increasing day by day. Every year they publish that statistic that is a digital snapshot they call, and in that they publish that how many people are using internet or how many of them are having digital devices, they are using mobile phone. So if you could look at the statistic over the years, it is increasing exponentially every year. So effect of that is rise of cybercrime cases. If you could look at the scenario in India the number of cybercrime cases registered, that number is much more than the number of arrests made in cybercrime. So why there is a difference? You can see the red one is the registered cases and the green one is the arrest made in those cybercrime investigations or cases. So why there is a difference between that number, the cases registered and the arrest made, is just because the evidences which we are collecting, they are not acceptable in court of law. There are many why those evidences are not acceptable? Because they are not forensically sound. They are not satisfying all characteristics. Then the below one is that is a VPN estimation about the damage caused by cybercrime. So in 2019, VPN has predicted that by 2025, the damage cost of cybercrime would go to $27 billion. But if you could look at the current scenario, in the year 2021 only itself, it has reached up to $6 trillion US. So the prediction has gone wrong, and in 2021-22 only it has reached up to $6 trillion US. So you could imagine the situation here and how the cybercrimes are rising, how much money we are investing into it. Then the statistic also shows you that there are 16 victims per second, cybercrime victims. What is the birth rate of India? Birth rate, what is the birth rate? Not India, global birth rate. It is around 4.5 to 5. So that birth rate is also times every second. Okay, so this is a motivation to study this field of cybercrime and digital forensics. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Is it on? Yes,
प्रॉपर टाइम काय होतं प्रॉपर नाही झालं
yes, I think there is a way. So what is forensic science? So forensic science standards board is a scientific organization which is actually looking after the different branches of forensics. So not only digital forensics, but there are multiple branches of forensics. So now here we are interested only in digital forensics. Again, digital forensic is having multiple branches depending on the device which is used to attempt the cybercrime. For example, we have mobile forensic. We also have database forensics. So there are multiple branches of digital forensic. Out of that, network forensic is one of the branch. Okay. Range issue. Okay, no problem. So you could see here the different branches of digital forensics are computer forensics, mobile forensics, database, network forensics, and the last one, net forensics. So here we are interested here in network forensics. So how different is network forensics? So as you all know, network is the backbone of attempting a cybercrime. Okay. So network forensics is all about collecting and examining the evidences from the network or the internet which is used for attempting a cybercrime. So it is monitoring and analyzing a computer network traffic, and for that we are using a network forensic tools. So what is the current challenge behind this network forensic is, the current challenge is to identify the exact source of cybercrime. So if we could see here, suppose some cybercrime has happened, so what can be the most important or primary evidence in that case? To catch the person or to catch the device which is used to attempt the cybercrime? It's both, right? But what digital forensic is doing is to catch the digital device which is used to attempt the cybercrime. So here the challenge in front of network forensic is to identify the exact source of cybercrime. To identify the exact device, the laptop, the mobile phone which is used to attempt that cybercrime, that is the biggest challenge of network forensic. To identify exact source of cybercrime. If you could look at the map here, that is the live threat map. Majority of you might be knowing about that. So the live threat map is giving you the idea of which country is sending attack traffic to which other country. If you could look at the statistic below that, there you can find out which is the source and what is the destination of that attack traffic. But those IP addresses which you are getting here, these IP addresses are not the IP addresses of the exact device which is used. These are the IP addresses of internet service provider. So you can only reach up to the edge router or the internet service provider, right? But that is not our aim. We have to catch the exact device which is used to attempt the cybercrime. So all these techniques, the maps which we can see here, they can only reach up to internet service provider of the attack. So there are network forensic techniques which are used to unmask the source identity. Unmasking the source identity is to catch the find out the original identity of the attacker. Okay. So for that, currently network forensic techniques are used, but these techniques can only go up to the edge router, as I said. So what are these techniques? So they are called as the traceback techniques. You might have heard about IP traceback techniques. So those IP traceback techniques starts with the victim device and try to trace the IP address of the attacker. So in that case there are two major modules, or we can say phases. The first one is embedding the evidences. So whenever the packet is traveling through the network, the evidences are embedded into the packet. And when it reaches up to the victim, from there the traceback actually starts. And with the help of those markings, people try to reach up to the original source. So that is, they are the different traceback techniques. So there are multiple types of traceback techniques. The observations after studying these different traceback techniques is that by using these techniques or IP traceback technique, you can reach only up to the internet service provider of the attacker. So if you could see there, the victim is located there in the edge, that edge network, and the criminal is somewhere here. But by using this IP traceback technique, we can reach only up to the service provider network 2. But actually there is a huge network behind that ISP, and the attacker is located somewhere behind ISP. And there is no such technique which is going beyond ISP and identifying the source of cybercrime. Everybody is reaching only up to the internet service provider. Now how the investigations are carried out these days? So people reach up to internet service provider, they try to collect the logs from internet service provider, analyze those logs, and then identify the true source of cybercrime. But in that also, these ISPs are all competing entities. They are often reluctant to give the logs. Even if they give, what is the guarantee that those log information is secure? How securely it is maintained? How authentic that information is? So we cannot rely on the information which is preserved by the internet service provider. So what are the observations from this is, to reach beyond the ISP or edge router is still a manual process. People has to take the log, analyze them, and to find the origin. Then integrity and privacy of the evidences, as I said, if you believe that those ISP logs are your evidences, then there has to be some mechanism which will prove that those logs are preserved with integrity. Then there is a lack of proactive traceback. There are two techniques, reactive and proactive. The reactive technique works after attack, whereas the proactive technique works during attack or before attack. Right? So all the existing techniques are like these techniques are proactive techniques. The dependency of ISP is very high, as I said, that we have to collect the logs from ISP, we have to depend on them. And even if there is a mandate from Government of India to maintain the logs and to maintain the privacy of those logs and all, but still they are not maintaining them properly. Then current network protocols are insufficient for forensic investigation. So the conclusion from this is that the existing network protocols, they are not sufficient to collect the information which is required for forensic investigation. So if you could look at, as I said, that we have developed a tool which is called root tracker. So where exactly that tool is working? So if you could look at the first stack, in the TCP/IP protocol stack, we were having HTTP only. Okay. Long back, we were having only HTTP. We were working with that HTTP protocol, but the thing was, it was vulnerable. Then slowly there came a need of security. Then people introduced SSL. Then SSL was added, but even if without SSL also we can use, right? We can only use HTTP also, but there is no security. Then come SSL, and then that HTTP is converted into HTTPS, which was for security. But now there is the time has come where there is a strong need of forensic investigation also. Because as we have seen that the crimes are increasing, okay, so we need this forensic investigation also. At least in the banking sectors or wherever the money transactions are involved, there we need this forensic investigation frequently. So there has to be some mechanism which will provide us with the protocols which will help us in collecting the evidences. So there is a need to incorporate a new layer which is called as forensic. Along with SSL, the forensic layer will be a add-on facility like SSL only. Still we can use HTTP only, only HTTP is also allowed, HTTPS is also allowed. Like that only this forensic layer, that will also be a add-on facility. Whoever requires that can use it. Right? So our proposed tool root tracker will work at that forensic layer. Okay, along with SSL we will now use the forensic layer, and that is now forensically safe. Not only security, but it is forensically safe, and whenever there will be a cybercrime, automatically the evidences will be collected, and the evidences will be collected in such a way that they will be accepted in the. So that is where the proposed tool root tracker will go. So the objectives behind this tool root tracker is it has to uniquely identify the criminal device. As I told you, the biggest challenge is to uniquely identify the device. So that was the main objective, to unique identification of criminal device and evidence verification and admissibility of evidences. As I told you, evidences are collected now also, but they are not being accepted because they are not forensically sound. So evidence verification and admissibility of evidences is the major objective, and to reach up to the exact source of cybercrime is the another objective. So based on these two objectives, this tool root tracker is developed. So this is the system architecture of root tracker. I'll just shortly explain you this thing, and then in the further slides I'm going to explain each and every phase in more detail. So here you can see there is a bank database server. So this is a case study. Let us consider that some bank transaction is happening and there is a crime. Somebody has hacked the transaction, or somebody has attempted a cybercrime. So there is a bank database server. At the time of transaction only, we are collecting the evidences. As it is a proactive technique, it is collecting the evidences at the time of transaction. So from the bank database, the attacker's device fingerprint is extracted. I'll explain what is device fingerprint and all. And then it will go to investigator. After that, investigator will start the normal investigation process and can reach up to the internet service provider. As I told you, that existing technique, the traceback techniques and all, they can reach up to ISP. So we are not supposed to work on those techniques. They are foolproof technique. They are working properly. So we can use them as it is. The only thing is we have to go beyond that and identify the exact source. So up to that part, there is no contribution of root tracker. Okay, we can reach up to internet service provider by using existing technique. Beyond that, we have the network forensic tool root tracker, and that is the service provider's network where the attacker is hiding. Then we have to perform the analysis by using the hashing and comparing of the device fingerprints that I will explain you shortly. And then the root tracker is also generating the reports. The reports are also generated in such a way that they are acceptable in court of law. So I will now explain you what are the phases of root tracker and how exactly it works. So this is the network forensic framework of root tracker. For network forensic or digital forensic, you might have studied different framework. There are different framework. People have added their own phases, remove some existing phases, split those phases or combine them together. Okay? So we all can develop our own forensic framework. So for root tracker, we have also developed the network forensic framework and then identified that only with the 5 phases it can work. So the first and most important phase is preparation. For any forensic investigation, the preparation phase is the most important phase. So preparation is all about making the network infrastructure ready to work that tool. So to use root tracker, there are some prerequisites, right? So to make the infrastructure ready to collect those evidences. So that is the preparation phase. So in preparation phase, we have beforehand capture of device fingerprints and preservation and protection of evidences by using AAC. So AAC is the term which is Automatic Automation Corporation. It is a legal term. It indicates that when you are collecting the evidence, at that time only, there has to be some authentication mechanism with which that is collected. Okay? And that authentication information is to be embedded in that evidence only. So while collecting evidence, we have to follow this Automatic Automation Corporation, AAC. So we have to preserve and protect the evidences with AAC. Then we have another phase of detection or case registration, that is after cybercrime. Then collection of evidences again, and examining and analyzing and reporting and presentation. So we will explain you one by one the phases. So this is the conceptual framework of root tracker. So see what is happening here. As I told you, there are 2 major things which we have to focus here, is to identify identify the true origin of cybercrime and collect the forensically sound evidences. So there are two phases here. First one is collecting the evidences and another one is verification of evidences. So when you are collecting evidences and preserving them, you must be in a position to prove those evidences in court of law. Okay. So evidence verification is also equally important to collection of evidences. So in collection of evidences, as it is a client server system, on the server side we are preparing a agent process, and then at the time of transaction we are deploying that agent on the client process, on the client system, and then we are executing the agent and collecting the fingerprint parameter. So for that you should first understand what is fingerprint. So here we have used the concept of device fingerprint. So I'll first explain you what exactly the idea behind the Zoom tracker is. So see here, we are using the concept of device fingerprint. So what is device fingerprint? Just like your normal fingerprint. Your normal fingerprints are unique. Why they are unique? There are some features which are different in all of us. So nobody is having the same fingerprint, right? Like that only we have to find out a fingerprint for the device which is used to attempt the cybercrime. So how we can identify the device fingerprint? There are many ways, right? We can collect some features of the device, and the combination of all those device features will be unique. Then we will call it as a device fingerprint, right? So now in the existing system also people are using device fingerprint. If you could have observed, suppose on Amazon I am searching something. Suppose I am searching for a refrigerator on Amazon, and if I go to some other site, there I can see the ads of refrigerator. How that is happening? Because the people are collecting your device and they are identifying that from this particular device, this particular product is searched and the similar ads are. Okay. So nowadays also device fingerprints are used. They are also used for this thing, browser identification and software licensing also. Software licensing, if you purchase the license of your antivirus, you can run it on only one device. Even if you format, you can still run it on the same device, but you cannot use it on the other device, right? So they are using a device fingerprint technique. The device on which it is installed for the first time, the fingerprint of that device is captured, and then on the same device only you can run it. So these device fingerprint techniques are already there. So when we studied this device fingerprint technique, we identified that these techniques cannot be used as it is as a forensic investigation, digital evidences. Why? Because these techniques are using the parameters like the operating system which is installed, the fonts which are installed on the device. So such things we cannot use in forensic investigation, because if I use fonts as my device fingerprint, next day somebody can uninstall some of the font, can install some new fonts. Is it possible? No. If I use operating system as my device fingerprint, can I use it? No, I cannot use. So I cannot use any software parameter because it is very easy to change it. Any normal person can easily change one of the software parameter. If it is changed, your device fingerprint will never match, right? So we are using this concept of device fingerprint. Slowly I'll tell you what parameters we have used and all. So first we will look into this, that is secure evidence acquisition protocol. As I told you that evidence collection is the most important thing. How we are collecting the evidences. Because how you are collecting the evidences, that is also equally important. You have to prove it in the court of law that how you have collected those evidences. So for that, this new protocol is developed which will work at that forensic layer. I have shown you that layer. So on that layer, this particular protocol will work. Like SSL also, we have multiple protocols which are working in that layer. So forensic secure evidence acquisition protocol will work at the forensic layer. So as I told that we are using the concept of device fingerprint. So we have a fingerprinting client. That client fingerprint is to be collected and that is stored at the server side. So server can be, suppose we have a bank server and I am one of the customer who is trying to perform some transaction. So at the time of transaction I will be a client, right? So that is a fingerprinting client. So for my device the fingerprint is to be collected and that is to be stored at the server side along with every transaction. With every transaction we are collecting the fingerprints and storing it. And whenever there is a cybercrime case, whenever a case is registered, for that particular case will go to bank server, the investigator will go to bank server and will extract a device fingerprint. From that fingerprint he can reach up to the exact source of cyber, right? So for that, how we are collecting the evidences. So this secure evidence collection protocol is having three entities. We have fingerprinting client, fingerprinting server and a database where we are storing that. So the first phase here is agent-based fingerprint parameter acquisition. So we are deploying the agent on a client machine. So there might be a question in your mind that when you are deploying the agent on client machine, will the client allow me to deploy it? Nobody will allow me to deploy it. Okay, but then if you want to perform some bank transaction, you have to agree with some terms and conditions. Unless and until you agree, you cannot do anything, right? So this process will come under that only. Unless and until the client allows us to deploy this agent, which will collect the fingerprint, will not allow them to perform the transaction. Because if you want a security, if you want evidence, then something has to be enforced, like forcefully the client has to do that, right? So here we are deploying the agent process. What the agent process is doing? It will execute on the client machine. It will capture the parameters which are required to generate the device fingerprint. Now you can have any parameters. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay. You can ask.
How do we ensure the reliability from the client perspective in this scenario? Because as a bank, we are collecting some device fingerprint of clients.
Right. Yeah.
So client has to, authenticate or give the permissions to.
Right. So if you could see the first two messages which are exchanged before phase 1 with the normal credential based authentication systems which bank are using, they are not touching that. They are not touching that. Same. Let the authentication be go with whatever is the regular process. We are not touching that process. Once authenticated, after that we are collecting the fingerprints.
Even we can make use of the information with things like Aadhaar card.
Right, sir. Right. Right. Yeah. So once you run that, that will capture the parameters required for calculation of device fingerprint. So it can be any parameter. You can decide your own parameters. Okay. So we have also decided some parameter that I will show you. Then once it is done, then the next phase starts. The phase 2 is transmission of fingerprinting parameters. So once you collect it, only collection is not sufficient. You have to securely send it from client to server. So by sending them, there are multiple things like it is susceptible to attacks, man-in-the-middle attacks, session hijacking, DDoS, many things are there. So how we are doing here? So here we are generating a key at the fingerprinting client device. Again, there is a possibility that if the key is compromised, then second time when the person is doing transaction, that transaction is vulnerable. But here, what we are doing is, we are achieving a key freshness thing. Have you heard about this key freshness? So key freshness is what? Whenever you are doing transaction or communication, suppose you are using normal symmetric key algorithm. What we do? Client and server both agree on a key and then they use that key. So it is up to them when to change the key. They can continue with the same key also. But if the key is compromised, then they are susceptible to session hijacking attack, right? So this should not happen here. So we are achieving key freshness here. Key freshness means every time a new key is generated. Every time. Then that too, how the key is generated? The key is generated with the attributes of the device itself. Attribute of the device itself. There is no random number. There is nothing which is assumed or which is predefined between client and server. So we are generating the key itself with the attribute of that machine only. So here, suppose I have identified 4 parameters that I will use these 4 parameters to generate my fingerprint. Suppose font, operating system, anything else, whatever. So 4 parameters if I have decided, how I will generate the key? Those 4 parameters I will collect. Then I will divide it into block of k by 4. Suppose my key size is k bits. Then I divide it into k by 4. And then randomly I will select one block from each parameter, randomly. So randomness is also there, and due to that every time a new key would be generated. Okay. So key freshness is also achieved. You can explore more into this area again. This key generation of key and all itself is one of the research area. So you can go into the more details of this. So once we are generating the key, what we are doing is we are signing. Once that key is generated, the message which is sent from client to server, it contains that data. Data is nothing but a parameter information which is required for device. Now one more thing which is important here in forensic investigation is non-repudiation. Have you heard about this non-repudiation? You all might have heard about confidentiality, integrity, availability, authenticity. Non-repudiation is one of them. So the client or server, both of them should not deny after sending or receiving the messages. Whenever you are catching somebody that you are a cyber criminal, will he accept? No. So we should have some proof that you only have done this particular crime. So non-repudiation is equally important in investigation of cybercrime cases. Both the parties should have the proof of non-repudiation. It is not like only the bank should have the proof. No, there might be some insider who is a criminal. Okay, so both the parties should have the proof. The client should also have a proof of non-repudiation. Server should also have a proof of non-repudiation. So that is called as non-repudiation of origin and non-repudiation of receipt. Okay. So server should have non-repudiation of origin. So once we are sending that message, a care is taken that the message will act as a non-repudiation of origin. So what we can do is we can add signature algorithms, we can have encryption algorithms into that. So we have also used some particular signature algorithms here and encryption algorithm. So then there is one more possibility that once the server receives non-repudiation origin, server will terminate the connection. Right? If there is a attacker, he will terminate the connection. But after terminating the connection also, he will not get the device fingerprint unless and until the server sends the non-repudiation of receipt. Because if you could see here, the data which is encrypted, that is by using the key, and the key is generated at the client side with some random algorithm. So unless and until the key is received, the server will not get the device fingerprint. So once a non-repudiation of origin is received, server is not getting anything, any information about the brand. So he has to send the non-repudiation of receipt. Now once non-repudiation of receipt is received at the client side, client is now also having a proof. Client is also having a proof here. And then after that, in the third message, the client will send a key. After accepting that, the client is sending a key. So after the exchange of message 3 only, the server will be able to decrypt that message and get the device fingerprint and store it in the database. Okay. So the care is taken here that a non-repudiation must be achieved, and that too both the parties must have the proof. Now the thing here is, most of the time the the sessions are hijacked. Authenticated sessions are hijacked. So how these hackers are hacking it? Whenever you are performing some transaction, once you authenticate yourself to the server, those authenticated sessions are hacked. So hacking mostly happens after the authentication, right? So if this thing happened, how we can deal with it? So what we have done is, before starting the transaction, after authentication we are collecting a fingerprint, right? Then we are sending a heartbeat message in some time. Like for example, we have decided the interval that after every 10 seconds we will send a heartbeat message, the heartbeat message. Like the heartbeat which is sent in a particular interval of time, we are sending the device parameters frequently. No? And if the session is hijacked, the authenticated session is hijacked, what will happen? The parameter will come from the different device. It will not match. If it will not match, you will not allow the transaction. You will decline that. Right? So in the third phase, we have taken care of that. That is recapturing of fingerprinting parameters. And that is done with a particular interval. There are many things here, like you can develop your own technical so that how frequently you want to send it, whether you want to send it at the starting, then at the end, whether you want to take it with the interval, or there can be many ways of doing this. So
we are to send frequently
that is that we also found that is more useful, so we send it frequently. So currently in Root Tracker it is sent frequently with a particular time interval, and if it won't match, we won't allow.
Maybe the chances that it's a water taking the data by sending frequent messages, because
can do is you can send either you can send the hash, make it small, or the parameter itself should be small, or you can send it with a chunk of multiple messages like that. So as I said,
There is also the scope of
scope. In each and every step of this protocol, there is a scope to change it. I myself have developed 3 versions of this protocol when we finalize this one. So there is a scope of research in this. As I said, on each and every slide you will get one research area where you can explore more things and continue with your research. This way you can also develop your own protocol. So this one we have developed for collection of evidences. And as I
What
said,
is the interval used?
after every 10 seconds we are sending. Because now for root tracker we have only developed a prototype on AWS. We have tested it, but it is still in a testing phase only, not yet deployed, because deploying is not that easy. No? So it is still in a testing phase. Prototype is developed, that is working fine. I'll also show you how we have done that. So this thing I have explained you that non-repudiation of origin and non-repudiation of receipt, how it is important, how it is verified. So if you want to go in more detail of this, these are all cryptographic operations which are performed. Here also we have simply used the general cryptographic algorithm, like for encryption we use AES, and for signatures, because we need to develop only a prototype. There is a question like it is very heavy or complex. So we can also try with the bilinear pairing based cryptography or elliptic curve cryptography. You can make it more optimized also. Okay, so there is still here also we can explore it more and change the algorithms. So what is device fingerprint that I explained? It's a set of system attributes which are collected, and then with a high likelihood this combination of these attributes is a unique one. So what is the procedure of collecting this device fingerprint? In protocol I showed you that we are collecting parameter and generating. But how we are doing that? Right? So in any device fingerprinting procedure, as I said, this is not something which is unique. Device fingerprint, the concept was there, but then it was used for different things, and algorithms of the procedure which they were using, it is not acceptable here. Because as I said, if you use fonts, not use. No, you cannot use them. They are also not acceptable as a yield access. So we have to rework on this also and generate your own device fingerprinting algorithm. So this is the procedure that you can identify the parameters. First step is identify parameters depending on your requirement. Then you can have data acquisition, how you are collecting the data, as I showed you in collection algorithm, right? So how you are collecting it, that is important. Then how you are generating it, and then how you are storing it. These are the 4 important things in any device fingerprinting algorithm. How you are collecting, which parameters you are using, how you are collecting, how you are transferring it, how you are storing it, and how you are generating them. So identification of parameters, briefly I will explain you. There are 2 ways here. Either you can take a static parameter or dynamic parameters. So static parameters, they can directly be extracted from the machine. Directly, fonts are there, you can just extract which operating system is used. You can see for any device, you can just send a query and you can get it. Dynamic parameters is calculated at the time of direct interaction with the machine. As I told you, agent is to be deployed, they have to be calculated, and then so either you can use static or dynamic. You can use software parameter or hardware parameter. Software parameters means can be set or changed using the simple software operating system and all. These are the software parameters. Or you can have hardware parameters. So hardware based parameters like serial number of your network interface card, serial number of your motherboard, processor. Okay? So these parameters. I am not saying that a person cannot change it. I can change. No? We can also change. If my hard disk is not working, I can change my hard disk. I can change my network interface card. So again, collecting the hardware parameter will also not solve the problem completely, but still it is better than software. There are less chances that those parameters are changed. Okay? So once you identify the parameter, how you acquire the parameters. So at the time of acquiring the parameters also, you have 2 techniques: passive parameter acquisition, active parameter acquisition. So passive means we don't need any permission from client. We can directly extract. Like you are also using these tools, reconnaissance tools. These days we teach our students So they can collect, no, how many name servers are there, how many file servers are there, what is the IP and all. Okay, so that comes under passive parameter. You don't need any permission for that. Whereas in the active parameter, it collects the features by sending a drafted queries. You are sending a particular query for a related parameter. That is active parameter collection, data acquisition. Then how you are generating the fingerprint. It is the most important thing here. How you are generating it? You can simply collect them, append them, generate the fingerprint. You can apply some cryptographic techniques on it, generate the fingerprint. But the thing is, it should be unique. Okay? So I'll explain you. So as I told you that existing fingerprinting technique, primordial techniques, they are used for user identification and tracking, track the particular user. Software licensing, privacy protection it is used. Authentication mechanism and browser fingerprinting is also used nowadays. They are using it for the different techniques, but we have thought of using it as a evidence. So what are our observations from this is the majority of approaches are based on software parameters. So we cannot use them. Such parameters can easily be modified. Then fingerprints generated by existing approaches are not forensically sound. If I present in the court of law that font of this particular device is matching and so this is the criminal, not acceptable. They are not forensically sound. And none of the existing approach can be used in forensic investigation. So once we identified that none of the existing approaches are working, so there is only thing left that we have to develop our own thing for generation of device fingerprint which can be used in court. So how we have identified the parameter? So our identification of parameter is we were having two options. Either we can go for static, dynamic or software and hardware based parameter. So we have thought of using features of hardware parameters. And these are the listed parameters which we have used. See, I am not saying that this is foolproof or these are the only parameter which you should use. You can use any parameter, but then you should check that if I am using this parameter, whether I will be in a position to prove the crime in court of law. And whether these parameters are less susceptible to change. Less susceptible. I am not saying that they are not susceptible. Anybody can change. Any part of your system you can change at any time. So these are some of the parameters which are identified that I can use them as a device fingerprint parameter. Then data is also acquired and then how the fingerprint is generated. So you might have heard about this Merkle tree. It is used in blockchain. Transactions are collected and then they are put and then the hash is generated using Merkle tree. This is a binary tree only. Simple binary tree. So we have used this concept of Merkle hash tree here to generate the device finger. So what is done here, the leaf nodes of these Merkle hash tree is fingerprint parameters. These parameters, no? Motherboard fingerprint, CPU fingerprint, BIOS fingerprint. So what is motherboard fingerprint? Few parameters of motherboard are collected and with the same method of Merkle hash tree, motherboard fingerprint is generated. So for all parameters, the individual fingerprints are generated and with the help of these individual fingerprint, a final device fingerprint is generated. So if you could see here, the hash of this motherboard fingerprint and hash of CPU fingerprint is taken and then the hash of that appended and then hash is generated. So at level 3 you can see a final device fingerprint. Here, it's a simple hash tree which is called Merkle hash tree and the leaves are the simple parameters. Just making the hash of that and at the root we can get the device fingerprint. So instead of that you can use any cryptographic technique. Any cryptographic technique which you have to develop on your own and then devise the fingerprint. Only thing is the fingerprint should be unique. It should be uniquely generated. Hash is the one which is unique. So we found out this to be the simplest one. So put it in the Merkle tree and use the hash as a device fingerprint. You can use any cryptographic technique. Now the qualitative analysis of proposed fingerprinting method, the fingerprint which we are generating, we have to test it, no? That whether it is susceptible to any attack, whether it is acceptable in court of law. So as I said that in section 65B of Indian Evidence Act, it is stated that any digital evidence is acceptable in court of law if it satisfies all these characteristics. So first characteristic is that inimitable, that it should be unique. Even if the two devices are having same make, configuration, same model, same operating system. Still the device fingerprint which is generated by this algorithm will be different. So uniqueness we are achieving here. The another thing is it should be robust to aging. Over the years of time the parameter should not change. If I am using operating system, so now I am using suppose Windows 10, tomorrow I am using Windows 11, can easily be changed. So it is not robust to aging. So you should select the parameter which are robust to aging. Then the third one is resistance to attack. They should know the technique which you are using. Suppose I am using some cryptographic technique. The technique itself should not be vulnerable to any attack. So we have using that Merkle hash tree and any hashing algorithm. Still now they are not susceptible to any attacks. So that can be used. Then it should be immutable and it should be unchallengeable in the court of law. It should be generated in such a way you must be able to prove the privacy, authentication, integrity, everything. It should be unchallengeable and it should be admissible in court of law. That is, it should be authentic, reliable, believable and complete. If you are collecting the evidence in such a way that it is satisfying all these characteristics, that evidence is acceptable in court of law. So whenever you are working on any cybercrime case or whenever you are collecting any evidences, working on evidences, in every step you have to make sure that we are not touching anything of this. If any of the parameter is not satisfied, like if you are not able to prove the robust to aging thing, then that evidence is not acceptable in court. Okay, so all our efforts will go in when we are not able to satisfy this. Right? Now you may ask me some question like some of the parameters changed. Then what will happen? So that also you are taking care. It is a fingerprint invalidation attack. My fingerprint is invalid. Now suppose the person has changed the network interface card. The network interface card is changed. One of the parameters is changed. What will happen? Look at the tree. My motherboard fingerprint will match, CPU will match, BIOS will match, timestamp will match, device disk drive fingerprint will match. NIC is changed. If NIC is changed at the root level, in level 0, one of the hash will be changed. It will not match. Then in the level 1 again not matched, level 2 not matched. Level 3 the final device fingerprint is not matched. But if you could look at the tree here, more than half of the tree is matching. So that is a partial evidence. Partially acceptable evidence. With this also you can prove the crime. Even if one of the parameter is changed, then my evidence is partially acceptable. So there is a concept of partial acceptance of evidence. So at least there we can stand. Like completely if it is invalid, then it is of no use. If you will use a software parameter, so some other technique of cryptographic technique. Suppose I am saying I will make the hash of all. Then if your final hash is not matching, you don't have any way to prove the partial things. But because of using this Merkle hash tree, we have some technique which can prove that partially it is matching. So you can generate a tree and show that only one branch of the tree is not matching. Now it is up to court of law to accept it, how much percentage it is matching, and that is to be checked. So fingerprint invalidation attack is possible, but still in that case partially it is acceptable. So this is all about root tracker. If you are interested, I can quickly show you how we have validated that. Because whenever you are developing any new thing in cryptography or security, any new algorithm, any new tool, it is very important to test it. Test whether it is safe or not. You cannot directly go and deploy it, right? So there are multiple ways of testing. The very first thing is whenever you are writing any cryptographic algorithm, security algorithm, you have to informally and formally you have to test it. The first thing is informal analysis. Informal on paper, you can just see that whether it is susceptible to replay attack. If yes, then you can stop it. So you should, for that you should know that how you can stop the replay attack. I can add the timestamp, easily I can stop the replay attack. If it is susceptible to denial of service attack, whether it is susceptible to session hijacking attack, man in the middle attack. You can use the digital signature, you can stop man in the middle attack. Like that, you can go on checking it. So that is called as informal security analysis. The another way is, I don't know whether how many of you know about it, it is a protocol analysis using band logic. Have you heard about this band logic? Any one of you? It's a Burrow-Odai-Needham logic. So here we can call it as mathematical proof. Mathematical proof that the protocol is secure. Right? So this band logic itself is a 1 hour thing. to explain that how it works. If any one of you is interested in this, because while doing my PhD, I really struggled a lot for this band logic and Avispa. Okay, so if anyone required any help with this band logic and Avispa, I am always there to help you all. Because whenever you perform this band logic analysis, mathematical analysis of your protocol, it gives weightage to your work, that it is proved mathematically also, right? Then the another third way which is used for analysis is by using a simulation study. You cannot go for direct implementation. Okay, so simulation we did and tested whether it is safe or not. So there are multiple simulations. Casper is there, Avispa is there. So I used Avispa. Avispa is automatic validation of internet security protocols and applications. Avispa. It is open source. It is available. You just have to learn the language for that. HLTSL is the language, high level protocol specification language, that you can easily learn, simulate your protocol, check whether it is safe or not. Right? And another last one is the experimental verification of root tracker. So experimentally we have verified, as I told you, we have just developed a prototype of that by using simple algorithms. You can optimize the things by using different complex cryptographic algorithms also. So these are the different ways which you can use to test your tool, to test your protocol, to test your security application. So whoever is working in cryptography, network security, so this is the flow which you can follow in your research, or whenever you are guiding students. At that time also you can tell them to prove informally, then to prove mathematically, then to simulate, and then final experimental verification. Okay. So this is all about the root tracker. If you want me to go in more detail, I can go in detail of BAN and Avispa, but I don't think you'll be able to get it. If it is required, I can share the things with you, or I can one-to-one also I can explain if required. Okay, I have the PPTs for that, but I don't think. So this is the flow of BAN logic, that how you can do that. First you have to the way I showed you, my protocol, how the messages are exchanged. So you have to first write down your own messages. That is called Alice-Bob notation. So that you have to write. And you have to set the goals for your protocol. What goals you want, right? Goals you have to set, whether you want authentication, whether you want privacy. Goals you have to set, and then you can go ahead. Like this, we have written the messages which are exchanged between clients, and these are few assumptions, and those are the goals. Now see here, I'll tell you the first 4 goals which I said. These are the simple goals, that client and server both should agree that this is the symmetric key to be used. Right? So in normal protocols you can use those rules. But the thing here is that the important thing is to prove non-repudiation. Right? So nobody has done proved non-repudiation using BAN logic. So that we attempted and proved non-repudiation using BAN logic. So see these things, these simulation or these mathematical modeling and all, you have to change it according to your needs. The things are there, people have used these things in a traditional way only. But then you have to think a little bit ahead of that, and you can see that how you can use it in your own research. Right? So you can modify it slightly. We have modified the BAN also, and then prove this non-repudiation. So this is our protocol analysis, and this is how you can write down the proofs. Won't be of use. Avispa, I shortly tell you that how Avispa works. So basically it is, first you have to write a protocol in CAS plus notification. Then along with Avispa we also have an animator of that, security protocol animator, because if you work only with the course it will be a little boring. So you can go with SPAN and security protocol animator, which will help you in seeing that how it is introducing an intruder and how it is checked. So how Avispa does is, you have to write your own protocol. In the background, it introduces an intruder in between and run your protocol with a multiple iteration until it finds some bug or some vulnerability into it, or it finds that the protocol is safe. So the output of Avispa is it should be safe, and it executes it with these 4 models, I can say. On the fly model checker means what? On the fly means shortly it will check whether any vulnerability. Then constraint logic based attack searcher is, it will introduce the attacker, it will put some constraint on it, and then it will check. Then satisfiability check and tree automation based protocol check. So you can explore this thing, it is open source again. So let's go about Avispa. You can explore flow, and this way it shows the output. OFMC and CLATC are used, and there you can say in red color, safe, safe. The protocol is safe, the output should be safe. If it is not safe, then it will give you some errors. Or what all attacks are possible, that list of attack also it gives. Man in the middle attack is there. How it is there, that also it gives. In which step, how the intruder can attack, that also it gives. A wonderful analysis it gives. And this is how we experimentally verified it. It's okay, I think. This is how we collected the parameters on, again we face the problem that on Windows machine we have to collect it differently on Linux device. iOS, different commands are required. I was not having access to any iOS, so I tested it on Windows and Linux only. So if anybody is interested, can carry forward these things also. Sir, change हो नहीं है? Okay, and this is how this GUI, and this is how the reports which are generated. Again, show you. So the report open partial, partial. Okay, 100%. Partial. So see how this root tracker is generating the reports. No, it is generating two types of report: 100% match report and partially. As I told, no, if one of the parameter is changed, partially only it matches. So this is how it generates. So can you please scroll down? So case description first is gives, then investigator information. Sit little down. Attacker device fingerprints. Level wise we are giving. Now the thing is like why it is required level wise? Because as I said now, fingerprint invalidation attack is possible. So to prove it partially, level wise report is to be generated. Because for every level then you can compare it. So level wise it is generating, and then that is a query fingerprint, and that is the one which is captured. So query fingerprints means suppose the case is registered for a particular transaction. That for this particular ABC transaction a cybercrime case is registered. That this transaction is not done by legitimate user. Then for that particular transaction the query fingerprint is extracted from bank database. As we have seen, no, in bank database we are storing the fingerprint for every transaction. Then that query fingerprint is given as input to root tracker. Then root tracker will broadcast it in the network again and collect the live fingerprints and then match it. So there is a case that the attacker will never on his or her device. No, once we attempt the crime and then just shut it down. So we can put an alert into that. Whenever the device comes online, at that time it will collect. Like that again there is a scope for improvement. This is how it is generated. Thank you. So this is how I can conclude here that the proposed tool root tracker will demonstrate the capability to reach up to the true origin of cybercrime. So we have attempted to reach up to the exact source of cybercrime, and the device fingerprint which we are using as a evidence is also satisfying all characteristics of evidence which is prescribed in Evidence Act, and the fingerprint is also verified partially. So that is one of the advantage here, that whatever efforts we are taking, all efforts are not wasted even if one of the parameter is changed. And the dependency of ISP is very less, like we are not using anything from ISP, no logs, nothing, only identifying ISP and then going. Okay, so that's it from my side. If you have any questions, you can ask.
How you generated fingerprints? Means what are the parameters used?
I don't know, ma'am. I have used the hardware parameters, motherboard parameters, some processor parameter, hard disk parameters that we have used. You can add, delete parameters. You can find out some more robust parameters.
Individual device, individual fingerprint is created or integrated?
For every device, only one fingerprint. No, sir. Only one fingerprint. And that too, that is a simple hash. So we don't require much memory to store. So there might be a question that for every transaction you are collecting the fingerprint, how you are managing with the storage? It's a simple hash. Yes.
And during transaction, if any hacker try to catch the fingerprint, then what process?
Sir, as I said that if you try to catch the fingerprint is encrypted by using the symmetric key which is generated, and the key is generated freshly every time. So even if you catch the this thing, no fingerprint, he won't be able to get it because that is encrypted with the symmetric key which is generated at the client side. The key is also generated randomly, and that too we are using the attributes of the client to generate the key. Nobody can generate it.
It's like fingerprint is generated after some interval. Key is also generated after some interval.
Whenever you are sending, you can generate
Every
the key,
time.
or you can use one key for one transaction. That is the scope.
Standard algorithm is used to generate that fingerprint format.
No. We use the Merkle hash tree. No, we have generated our own algorithm only, because we need to prove it partially also, sir. If I use the standard algorithms now, I could get only the output. Getting only output is of no use.
Yes.
We need all the steps, like partially also we should be able to prove now. Otherwise then what is the use? We'll do all these things and then finally it is not matching and not acceptable. There has to be some contribution, even partial.
So you said that during the presentation you said you have used the system attributes for generating the key. You
Hmm.
not use any random generation algorithm or
No.
anything else. What was the idea behind that? Why not those random generation?
See, the parameters which we are using to generate device fingerprint now, anyways you are extracting those parameters.
Yeah.
So we'll use the same parameters to generate the key also. So using the same parameter you can generate the key. Otherwise you can use your normal symmetric key generation algorithms also. But see what happens in the normal key generation algorithm, we have to either take the initialization vector, some random number, some number which is known to both of them. Then again there is a scope that compromise will happen. Yes, so for random generation of key we thought of that idea and use it. You can use anything for that, anything. But we are just trying to reduce the vulnerabilities, like susceptibility of attack.
During your parameter identification, you said that we have this focused hardware and we came to know that yes, hardware parameters they are more robust than software. But
Yes.
did you found any software parameter that you
In few papers, they have used the clock skew of the device. But after reading all those papers now, I found out that it is also easy to change it.
because it
Clock
is-
skew, some attack is also possible on that. So I have not used that clock skew also. But there are many algorithms which are using that clock skew. We also thought of using, but then found some papers where the attacks are possible on it.
even only a single parameter may not be that.
Not at all. Won't be acceptable.
Here we are considering 6 parameters.
You can consider more also, less also, depending on complexity, how much you want to add. Or instead of that Merkle tree, you can use something else also. Yes. Any cryptographic technique. Anything else? Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
I would like to thank Dr. Rajna Patil Madam for the informative session on network forensics. It was really very interesting to track the attacker's device using the root tracker tool. Thanks ma'am for the knowledgeable session that included the minute details of the process in client identification. Thank you ma'am for spending your valuable time.